and counting, we have, for all intents and purposes, become the modern-day equivalent of the Roman Empire. Since Richard Nixon eliminated America's last tie to gold, the offshore banks' systematic robbery of the American people through the privately owned Federal Reserve printing money and credit out of thin air and government economic interventionism have become so ingrained in our system that it threatens to cause an inflationary depression not unlike that experienced by Weimar Republic Germany, modern-day Argentina, or perhaps even as bad as modern-day Zimbabwe, whose inflation problem is so bad that its government recently printed a $100 billion bill. I repeat, a $100 billion bill. And since Richard Nixon first started spying on the American people, illegal wiretaps, secret enemies lists, and government infiltration of political groups to provocateur them into committing illegal activity via COINTELPRO, Richard Nixon established a police state control grid, which is thanks to expansions by President Clinton via the Echelon program and extraordinary rendition, and by President Bush via the Patriot Act, have become so pervasive that now every phone call, every email, every Google search is now tracked, traced, and databased without a warrant, without due process, or probable cause, where every individual, even if he is a citizen, which the government does not like, can be declared an enemy combatant, detained indefinitely, and even tortured without due process of law. Since President Bush has abused presidential signing statements to the point where any law Congress passes is irrelevant unless he agrees with them, the office of the presidency has ceased to become it's become nothing more than a democratically elected dictator, not unlike Adolf Hitler. And that even assuming the election was even remotely legitimate in the first place, which the elections of 2000 and 2004 were clearly not, thanks to a voting machine fueled and other forms of electoral fraud. And now Barack Obama is taking all these shameful abuses of power, and instead of getting rid of them as he has promised during his campaign, is expanding them further than tyrannical presidents have ever dared. Here is Barack Obama, as a matter of fact, a clip of him making that promise.
When Congress offers you a bill, do you promise not to use presidential signage to get your way?
Yes. Let me just explain for those who are unfamiliar with this issue. We've got a government designed by the founders so that there'd be checks and balances. You don't want a president who's too powerful, or a Congress who's too powerful, or a courts who's too powerful. Everybody's got their own role. Congress's job is to pass legislation. The president can veto it, or he can sign it. But what George Bush has been trying to do as part of his effort to accumulate more power in the presidency is he's been saying, well, I can basically change what Congress passed by attaching a letter saying, I don't agree with this part or I don't agree with that part. I'm going to choose to interpret it this way or that way. That's not part of his power. But this is part of the whole theory of George Bush that he can make laws as he's going along. I disagree with that. I taught the Constitution for 10 years. I believe in the Constitution, and I will obey the Constitution of the United States. We're not going to use signing statements as a way of doing an end run around Congress. All right?
What a shame that he doesn't actually believe that. President Obama continues to stonewall on his campaign promise to get us out of the unconstitutional, undeclared war in Iraq by continuing business as usual in Iraq, and even looking the other way on the continued production of a permanent base in Iraq which rivals the Vatican in its sheer size, has instituted a troop surge in the other unconstitutional undeclared war in Afghanistan, which only Congress has the power to do, and has gone so far as to limited air and missile strikes in Pakistan, again, without going to Congress. President Obama has shut down Guantanamo Bay as promised and has had civilian trials of some terrorism suspects, but that is nothing more than just a show to his base and Americans like myself who, unlike him, actually believe in the Constitution. Most of the infamous secret CIA prisons where suspected terrorists are held indefinitely are tortured and are still in operation, and the extraordinary rendition program is still in operation. President Obama is not only continuing, but expanding the Big Brother police state control grid of illegal domestic spying by attempting a total government takeover of the Internet through the Cybersecurity Act, which I went over last week, which, if passed, would require anyone who wanted to operate a website, an ISP, to be registered and licensed by the federal government, and anyone who wants to use the Internet to have a special ID or a driver's license for the Internet, as our friends at Microsoft want, and would also heavily restrict the amount of bandwidth which people would be allowed to use daily, and monitor every website which everyone visits to an even greater extent than they already do now. President Obama is expanding executive power to even more dictatorial levels than even Bush, by expanding presidential signing statements even further, and with his recently announced plans to use a series of executive orders to push through some of his policies which are currently stalled in Congress. Most notable are his plans to do what a failed Copenhagen Treaty failed to do by instituting the cap-and-trade fraud, which would create the environmental equivalent of the old practice of paying indulgences to the Catholic Church by allowing big corporations to spew as much of the supposedly toxic CO2 as they want, as long as they're willing to pay protection money to the big banks by buying carbon credits, which would raise the price of basic consumer goods so high that we'll barely even be able to afford to feed ourselves, thus enslaving us to these criminal scumbags. President Obama is expanding the violations into our personal liberties by introducing body scanners in airports that are so intrusive that they violate child porn laws, that are scientifically proven to give you cancer and do not track the things they're supposed to track, expanding COINTELPRO-style operations and demonizing people he doesn't like with things like the MIAC Homeland Security Report, which declares, in particular, gun owners, libertarians, conservatives, constitutionalists, pro-lifers as right-wing terrorists, and anyone else who dares question Big Brother is, again, dangerous right-wing terrorists. And he is now in the process of having FEMA build concentration camps. I mean, here is a clip, an actual honest-to-God clip of a FEMA training class.
You're damn right, because think about the Christians, okay? Do you accept Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior? No. What did they do? They took your head off. They beheaded you if you didn't accept Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior. See, this is reality. Yeah,
Okay, I'll play that again, this time with the volume turned up. That's kind of a little...
You're damn right, because think about the Christians, okay? Do you accept Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior? No. What did they do? They took your head off. They beheaded you if you didn't accept Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior. See, this is reality. Yeah, they're terrorists, but the bottom line is to them, they are not. Now, why is that important to understand? Because they are as committed to their cause and to their way of life as you are yours. And they see you as being wrong. That's very different. When people are passionate about what they believe in, they become a very difficult enemy to be. Who was the first terrorist organization in the United States? Who? Founding Fathers. You mean Thomas Jefferson? Oh, yeah. You mean George Washington? Oh, yeah. Paul Revere? Yeah. These guys right here, let me ask you something. Did they try to scare people? Oh, yeah. They tried to intimidate the British. Did they use acts of violence? Your founding fathers, my founding fathers, were involved in acts of terrorism against British officials because they systematically had British officials assassinated. The guys who we call our founding fathers, George Washington, Mr. Arnold, who cut down a cherry tree and admitted it, is the same guy who signed death orders, if you will, on members of the British government, the British Crown, who they wanted to eliminate because politically they had influence in certain pockets of the United States, at that time the 13 colonies, and they wanted to divide and conquer. They may get a whole lot of civilians, and hey, I'm going to be honest with you, okay? If they